Turkey.
Now, your mother was a young woman at that time.
Yes.
My guess is 20, 21 years old. Did she leave on her own? Did she leave her country on her own? Or did someone go with her to Chios?
No, she left on her own, except for some of her maybe nieces or nephews, but otherwise her father had already died, and with her mother, but maybe not on the same ship. But later on her mother joined her in Chios.
In Chios. Now, in Chios, were they discriminated against in Chios when they came because they were refugees from Turkey?
Yes, they didn't like them because they had come from Turkey, and instead of them, well, in fact, they had them living in real poor conditions. They gave them a place to stay underneath some steps outside, which, you know, if it rained, they got wet or what. And then after that, they just tormented them. They called them all kinds of names. Instead of them calling them refugees, they used to call them the Greek word, you know, instead of saying prosvies, they used to call them prostiches. And my mother would cry and say, you know, they called us bad names in the second one, so which one happened, I don't know.
Well, so what you're saying is that the pogrom, you called it the second pogrom, which everybody's captured, 1921-22, but you're saying that the Turkish officials were actually harassing
Oh, definitely. Mm-hmm.
your family.
Earlier.
Your family, and your family, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, had enough foresight to say, we better leave now before it's too late.
Definitely, yes.
So because they had perhaps the means, the money, they were able to get passage from a ship from Cesme to the closest island, which was Chios.
Chios. Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Your father left Cesme in 1912. When was he able to reunite with his fiancée, your mother? How long before they were able to reunite?
He was able to bring her back, bring her to the United States in 1920, the beginning of 1920.
So they were separated for 8 years.
8 years, yes.
That makes sense.
8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your father made his way from England, eventually you said to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually to Vandergrift, Pennsylvania, which is in western Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh, correct?
Yes.
What did he do for work?
Well, for work at the beginning, when he came here, he went to a steel mill. He was a steel worker.
And so it took him 8 years to save enough money, then to eventually send the money to your mother in Chios, and he was able to bring her back on a ship?
Yes.
And that was around year 1920. Do you remember the name of the ship?
The name of the ship was Themistocles. And it took them about a whole month to cross the ocean because something broke down on the ship and they thought they were going to drown. But eventually they made it to the United States.
So it would be good if Patricia could reiterate the story, the narrative that you just gave prior to the departure, so we hear it all from you, that your mother received word from your father and got the money.
Oh, yes,
So
yes.
let's just tell that.
In fact, when my mother all those years was away from my father, they weren't married, he was here and she was there, he still used to send a check every month for them to live better than they were, you know, when they first went to Chios. And this way, she was better off that way because she had something to live with.
So for 8 years, your father...
He kept supporting her and her mother.
And her mother.
And her mother, yes.
Supported them for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
So do you recall then, in your own words, when your father actually made contact with your mother to bring her over? Do you remember that conversation or the stories behind how eventually she was to make herself way to Chios to Athens and eventually get the ship to?
Well, the reason why, like at the beginning, they couldn't because we had our First World War here. You know, and it started, what, 1911 to 1914, what was it? Something like that? 14 to 18, something like that.
We didn't get into it till.
Yeah, but like I say, then this way, he wasn't able to bring her then with all that war going on. And then later on, after everything quieted down, this is when he brought her,
So,
in 1920.
so for 8 years he worked,
He worked
he
and,
sent both of them money.
and kept them, yeah.
Now, did he bring your mother's mother to your yaya over, or just your mother?
No, just my mother came
And did she come through Ellis Island?
through Ellis Island, yes, and they kept them there for quite some time because, I don't know, they said some of them were kept there longer because they had lice or whatnot, you know, but finally they were all let go.
So
And
perhaps
she
they were
came.
quarantined there.
They were quarantined there for quite some time.
Until they passed the health test, being on the ship for a month, I could imagine, yes. Okay, so that ship coming over, your mother said that they were stranded, dead in the Atlantic because,
Something went wrong with the ship, I
and
don't know.
I believe you used the word, something happened to the ship, and I forget the.
In Greek, she told us, she says something happened to the Elinga in the ship. I don't know what that meant.
We'll have to check that to whether it meant rudder or not. You know, that's very good. And so they were stranded, imagine, a month on the Atlantic. Okay, all right. And they came through Ellis Island, as you said. They were quarantined there because of who knows why.
No.
We don't have a record of that. All right. And so but your father then made arrangements to have your mother brought to probably the city closest to Vandergrift, which would have been Pittsburgh. Do you remember, was that by train, or did he go get her? Do you recall? Do you have any of that?
No, I know that she landed in New York on Ellis Island, but then how he got her back to Vandergrift, I really don't know. Whether they came to pick her up or what, I don't know.
So, can you tell me again, what brought your father from Tesmed to England? He jumped ship in the U.S. and ended up in Vandergrift. What was the attraction of Vandergrift, Pennsylvania?
Because my mother's brother was living in Vandergrift, PA, and he got in touch somehow, you know, found out where he lived and everything. My mother's brother was named Kiriako. He was married, and this is how he got in touch with him, found out where he lived, and that's where he came and stayed with my mother's brother until he was able to bring my mother back from Greece.
So he stayed with your mother's brother for at least almost 7 or 8 years.
Yes, quite some time.
To save enough money to
bring my mother back.
Can you tell me a little bit about their life in Vandergrift? Can you tell me about, let's talk about the Greeks in Vandergrift. Where were the bulk of them from?
Most of them were from Asia Minor. Yeah, Mikrasiotis, yes. But there were a lot of other ones too from other countries, you know, from Crete and from Rhodes and all others, but there were mostly in Vandergrift, they were Asia Minor.
Were there other ethnic groups too there? Italians, Slavs?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of Italians. There were a lot of Italians and different nationalities, yes.
Let's go back to life in Turkey for your mother and her brothers. And did they ever have any disputes with their Turkish neighbors? Did you live in harmony? Was there ever a problem with the Turks itself, with the Greeks? Do you recall anything that your mother told you about that time?
Yes, I remember my mother told us where they had a lot of land. And because, you know, they used to do a lot of their own farming and whatnot. And they had a lot of property. And next to them, a Turk had some land too. But my grandparents' land was all irrigated. And the Turk decided to turn the irrigation into his fields instead. So naturally, my uncles got in an argument with the Turk. And they had an argument, and I don't know what. The Turk pulled out a gun or something, I don't know what. And naturally, my uncles, all three of them, were there, and naturally they weren't going to allow the Turk to kill them, so naturally they killed him instead. And then they ended up in jail in Budrumi, and they said once you went to that prison there, you never got out alive, because that was a Turkish prison. They were in for quite some time, but the boy's father hired somebody, you know, an attorney, and they told him what to do. So naturally, my mother was the youngest child in the family. She was allowed to go visit the brothers and take food into them. So what they did, I mean, the Turks would check underneath the plate, they'd check on top to see that there was nothing in it, and they would allow her to take the food into the brothers. But in the same time, my mother would mention to them, or rather just look at them, and they would look at her, in other words, telling them to look in between the food, because there was no note on the bottom or the top, and they knew they had a note hidden inside the food where the Turks would never find it. And they knew exactly what to say when they went to court. The instructions were all there. And that is why then when they went to court, they knew exactly what to say, and they freed them.
I see, that's very interesting. So it was your grandmother, I mean your mother, mother who carried the message, from the attorney
in the food,
inside the food, which gave them instructions on how to testify at the Turkish court. And they were found not guilty?
No, they were found innocent then, and they, you know, got out.
And then when they got out of Bodrum, did they leave Turkey?
Well, they still had to stay in Turkey for some time, a little bit, you know, but then after that, you know, with the Turks then and all this, I mean, they got out.
They got out, they left, and they went to Greece, the United States.
The one went to the United States. That was Kyriako. And the other one stayed. But they were then they went to Berea, they went to Athens, I don't know where they went.